Hey, welcome my friends. We're going to be taking a slight detour from fractions today to talk about decimals. So first let's talk about place value. If you have a number like, let's just say 325, as you remember, each digit is in its own spot, right? So you have the hundred spot. How many hundreds do you have? You have 3. It's like $300 bills. You have the tens spot. How many $10 bills do you have? 2. And you have the 1 spot. So that's all review, we know that. But here's where it's some new information, and you guys already know this because you spend money all of the time, or at least you think about money, you know about money. So when you see the dot right there, it means the place value is about to get into the what? Decimals. So this part over here are the decimals. So if you have 325 point, let's say 68, anybody know what that spot's called? It's not called the oneths. That wouldn't really make sense. It's called the tenths. So it goes right into the tenths. And the next one is, you guessed it, hundredths. So at this point, it starts kind of like doing the opposite on this side. And then just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So just like tens are 10 times as big as ones, and hundreds are 10 times as big as tens. They also get smaller this way. So ones are 10 times as small as tens. Tenths are 10 times as small as ones. Just like a dime is 1/10 the value of a $1 bill. And then pennies are 1/10 the size of tenths. So these get smaller and smaller and smaller by tenths. So notice hundredths and tenths and hundredths. We've seen that before, haven't we? Let's just look at tenths first. So 325 and 6/10. Well, that sounds a lot like 6/10, doesn't it? That's because it's the same thing. 6/10 are also known as 6/10. You notice I'm just saying the same thing twice. But 6/10 can be a fraction, or it can also be a decimal. 6/10 is 6 in the 10th spot, because in the 10th spot, tenths are tenths. Or let's say instead of a 6 in the 10th spot, let's say we had a 2 in the 10th spot. Then it'd be 325 and 2/10. 2/10, which is the same thing as 0.2. And you put a 0 before the 0.2, otherwise it'd just be 0.2, and people do that sometimes too, but it's nice to do it like this so you see, oh yeah, there are no holes. If I was to do it like this, 3 and 2/10, well then I know, oh yeah, I've got 3 holes. 3 and 2/10, 3 and 2/10. But if you're just talking about the 10th spot, you're not really worried about everything else. So it's 2/10. So yeah, if you wanted to have it as a mixed number, it'd be like 325 and 2/10. So sometimes you'd have it like that. It kind of just depends on what you're talking about. In measurement, you often use fractions. But in a lot of data and math, you get into decimals. So decimals are, as you get into more advanced math, you're going to be using decimals way more often than fractions. Fractions are very helpful. You need to know about decimals. So if I was to have a 9 there, what would that be as a fraction? Well, what's in the 10th spot? 9. How many tenths do you have? You have 9. You have 9/10. So 9/10 is the same thing as 0.9. 9 in the 10th spot. And what about, well, maybe we should just leave it for now. So we're talking about tenths. Tomorrow we'll talk about hundredths. But now we're just talking about tenths. So just get comfortable with saying just looking at what's in the tenth spot. If it's a 4, how many tenths do we have? Well, what's in the tenth spot? 4. 4 tenths. So just remember that is the tenths spot. Tenths, T-H-S, that th sound at the end, that means you're talking about decimals. So you might see something like this, let's say 8 tenths, and they say, hey, can you write that as a decimal? And you're like, oh yeah, I just write an 8 in the tenths spot. The tenth spot is the spot right after the decimal point. Tenths. Tenth spot, 8 tenths, 8 tenths. So it's kind of cool actually because it simplifies fractions a whole bunch because you're just talking about tenths and then hundredths and then thousandths, just like this, and then 10 thousandths, 100 thousandths. So you're not talking about thirds and fifths as much. It's just there's a tenth spot. There's not a third spot. There's a tenth spot, and then there's going to be a hundredth spot. Right now we're just talking about tenths. So what's in the tenth spot? 4. So how many tenths do we have? We have 4 tenths. So fractions can easily be turned into decimals if you just write a 0.4. And decimals can easily be written as fractions if you just write 4 over 10, 4 tenths. 4 in the tenth spot is the same as 4 tenths. 8 in the tenth spot is the same as 8 tenths. Or 8 tenths is the same as 8 in the tenth spot. So you'll do the Splash Learn today and just kind of work on that, getting used to saying what's in the tenth spot, and then I can write it as tenths also in a fraction form. Fractions and decimals are both talking about the same thing. They're talking about tenths in this case.